All right, welcome everybody to the third installation of Understanding the Edges. This is a series being put out by the Mayor's Commission on Homelessness and Affordable Housing, centered on breaking down the realities of homelessness and housing within our community. The series is really focused on, again, educating, the general population and service providers around some of the realities and misconceptions that are out there, but also serving to hopefully activate the citizens of the Charleston area to be more involved and engaged in the work that is to be done to combat homelessness and to ensure that everyone in our community has access to housing in the same ways. It's a huge task, and it's something that requires an all hands on deck kind of an approach. We each have a role to play regardless of who you are and where you're joining us from today. You have a role to play in, again, helping to ensure that every single person in our community is adequately and appropriately housed. So to speak to this issue today, we'll be featuring Nicole Paluzzi, the housing attorney from Charleston Pro Bono, who is doing some really excellent work that you're going to hear about. And facilitating the conversation today will be Lydia Cotton, a leader in a local Hispanic community and one of the commissioners on the Mayor's Commission with homelessness and affordable housing. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Lydia, and everyone enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Chris, for the opportunity. Nicole, I want to thank you first for this opportunity to be with us today and answer 12 questions. This is going to be very interesting to know exactly what do you think and what can you tell us. I have the first question for you right away, Nicole, and it's tell us about the work you do in community and why you do it. What are you doing in the community? Why are you doing all that, Nicole?
Well, I am the housing attorney with Charleston Pro Bono Legal Services, or I should say the senior housing attorney with Charleston Pro Bono Legal Services. We also have Cody Tedimer, who's on the call today too. What we do is we provide direct representation legal assistance on any issue related to your primary residence. If you are an eligible low-income resident of Charleston County and you have a housing issue such as landlord-tenant disputes, which are very widely spread through our community right now, whether it's eviction or a damage situation, or if it has to do with a security deposit. I also help with issues related to mortgages and foreclosure, as well as title disputes. We do have some issues that relate to property that's passed through intestacy but does not meet the requirements for an heir's property determination. So our organization does what we can to represent those clients, as well as provide educational resources, self-help resources, and coordinated responses to problems that have usually many facets. So it's not just the loss of housing, but also what is related to your employment and how this may affect your family and the ability to stay situated in your community.
Wow. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. What does housing justice means to you, Nicole?
Housing justice is a pretty broad term to me. It is not just having a market that provides affordable options, at every level of affordability. And I use affordability as being the 30% of your household budget and being able to afford that and not being rent burdened or mortgage burdened. To have the ability to know that the housing market will provide safe housing. So not just meeting the minimum essential services that each home and dwelling needs, but having assurances regarding the sufficiency of that housing for the people that are occupying. And if a dispute arises, fair housing. So any sort of protections from discrimination and being able to take those disputes in both fair housing and safety of the unit, or any sort of business dealing between a tenant and landlord or a mortgage or mortgagee, being able to take that to a fair and impartial tribunal for adjudication. So whether it's taking it to a judge in the magistrate court or the circuit court, being able to bring those disputes to a fair and impartial trier of law and fact, and not having procedural burdens such as high filing costs or extraordinary requirements as a barrier to getting to that judge.
Well, I'm going one at a time with these questions, Nicole, because they definitely, we have 12 and we want to take advantage of each one of them. The question number 3 is, in your perspective, why does someone become homeless? Why? Why that happen, Nicole?
If there was a simple answer, we could address it more simply, but there are a number of reasons why a person become unhoused. Whether it is a abusive process within the judicial system and somebody has been ousted from their home, whether it is a domestic situation between domestic partners, familial status, and somebody becomes the person left out. We have situations where people become unsheltered because of their lifestyle and it becoming, unfortunately, unwelcomed within their own family, and they find themselves left out again. We have people that suffer from mental illness or other disabilities that prevent them from being able to meet their obligations on a contract for a lease or a mortgage. And then there are all kinds of economic reasons that people might become unsheltered. So we do have a lot of issues right now with closures and loss of hours, furlough, and issues with unemployment that can strongly lead to a person being housing insecure. And we try and address those as best we can on a legal arena, and those that we can't, we want to try and work with our community service providers to address the other issues.
Nicole, but what are the biggest misconceptions about people we're talking about homelessness? What is the biggest misconception?
I think a lot of people wrongly assume that housing insecurity is a choice. I'm sure maybe there is a rare exception where it is a choice, but I don't think that is the wide response. And even in the people that actually would claim that it's a decision that they've consciously entered into, that might not be a genuine response there. So I don't believe that housing insecurity is a person's choice. And even if they are willing to state that they've made that election, it might be worth it to dig a little deeper with that individual and see if there is really another reason, and it is a comfort to them to believe that they've made that decision.
So folks that are being threatened, to be or serve with eviction, any type of eviction, what they can do? So
if a landlord or property manager is making a threat or giving a notice, I'm going to pretend that it's not malicious here and that they're issuing a notice of some sort of breach of lease or non-compliance with tenancy obligations, the best thing that a tenant or recipient of that notice can do is reach out for services immediately. Not just legal services, but whether it's rental assistance or some sort of other corrective action to deal with a breach. I mean, it may be something as simple as they have an unauthorized pet because the person has failed to give notice of need for a service animal or an emotional support animal under fair housing. And that's something we can address before filing goes into effect and protect that tenant's stability. And if it is something that revolves around utility assistance or rental assistance, we're in a better position on the front end before a case has been filed to get it corrected, get it cured. So if you are facing a notice of eviction or a notice of non-renewal or a threat of eviction or a filing, the best thing to do is to really call 211 from any mobile phone, get connected with the SD United Ways hotline there and tell them what you're needing help with and have a pen handy to take down everything they tell you. And then apply with us if you are a Charleston County resident and see if maybe you're eligible for direct representation.
Now, we need to add from day one that you received that letter, I assume, right? Mm-hmm. The faster, the better. Yep. And that is something that we notice in the community that maybe people shock and they wait. And that issue, right?
It is a hard one. We've actually had that report from a number of clients that they receive a notice of bad news, and usually this isn't the first thing that's become a disappointment in their life. Maybe they lost income because they lost their job and the bills are starting to pile up at home, and now this eviction is just one more thing to them. And when you have so many stressors in your life, it becomes difficult to manage them in the way you would normally. So if you are not doing your best and you're getting these notices, quick action, quick response, and being proactive is what you need to be doing. It might be hard for you to do that. I would encourage everyone that's facing those kinds of issues to really push past it, seek professional assistance, because the timeline on evictions in South Carolina is generally going to be 10 days. There are some different timelines if you have to post service, but if you are a tenant occupying a dwelling and you have received a visit from a constable and they've given you a magistrate's rule to vacate, that is the day you've been served, and the next day is day 1. If you don't request a hearing by day 10, close of business, and the court closes at 4:30, then it is the end of the road. That action is going to go forward as an eviction in default.
Well, in the Charleston area, we want to change the housing landscaping, right? But we have a lot of obstacles. Please tell us what they are.
So we have a number of wonderful communities that you can lease in, but what we don't have a number of are affordable available units. So that's one of my biggest areas of interest, is seeing an increase in affordable available ready units. We know where there are great affordable units, and generally they have great property managers, and people move in, they stay there forever, because why would you ever want to leave such a great setup? So by increasing the units, and we have some wonderful programs that are adding units this year and early next year, and we're hoping that those become available to our clients and people in the community as soon as possible. That is one way to address the issue. Another is what we're doing at Pro Bono Legal Services and trying to improve what we've got already by making sure that landlords follow their obligations to maintain and repair properties when due or demanded, that tenants feel empowered to assert their rights, and that they have the ability to seek that kind of redress in the court. So that's where our office is particularly tackling it. And then in the event somebody does find themselves in between housing, to be able to get them in the position to get rapid rehousing. And so that is another area where our housing landscape is shifting. We are seeing more rapid rehousing, or at least my clients are reporting that they are having more success getting into rapid rehousing since things had sort of been a little bit harder to get into during the COVID closures. But we are now seeing people get through the rapid rehousing and get reestablished. I would also like to see some legislative changes on the state level. So if anybody is considering something like inclusionary zoning, that would be a great tool for us to have in our toolbox if we could get it approved at the state level. But again, this is just my list of wishful hopes.
After you explain all that, Nicole, it would be okay for me to ask, where are our strengths lie? Where are they? Where are we stronger?
I think we're extremely strong in our community. There are a lot of talented people who are service providers. They're passionate, they're involved, they are participating. They care about their clients, they care about the issue. They are keeping the spotlight focused on the importance of housing and housing first as a community. Our local governments are working together with each other. Like this exact program is a mayor's commission. It's not just one jurisdiction operating independently. I want to say it's a neighborhood, but it's a neighborhood writ large, and we're all working together towards a common goal. And that kind of teamwork is a lot stronger than if we were acting independently and dealing with specific issues that we can only do so much on. But by having this wonderful web of connections, we're able to address the legal end in our office, and maybe we'll send them for rental assistance with, ShelterNet or one of the other service providers, Humanities Foundation, and being able to move forward with trying to get that rapid rehousing, or if they have some sort of tied to a specific program or agency, getting them to Florence Crittenden if they're eligible there, or the VA if they're a veteran, and making sure that those people are being accounted for and managed in the long term so that they do become established and have long-term success.
We know that community-wise, like you just explained, is ready to help and is helping.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very interested to know what is that percentage of people that is really putting their hands. Do we need more? Do we really need people to start thinking to put their hands on the stove, as we say, right? To really help in this crisis? Do we need that?
We always do. We always do. One of the attorneys that I'd worked with at Pro Bono had stated that we've been doing so much with nothing for so long that now we can do anything with nothing. Well, if we have a little something, we can go quite a bit further. And so by having this group, it's great. Having that passion and drive is good. But we have learned that there are a lot of places that are starting to run out of funding and need the support. And I know our office is always doing what we can to try and raise funds so we can keep providing the services that we're doing. And, we do regularly see these great outcomes for tenants and mortgagees, and try and get these arrangements that are mutually beneficial for repayment plans that will also benefit the landlord, as well as keeping stability in our community. So we do see the long-term benefit of the work we're doing, but that does require people, it requires dollars, it requires advocacy and, premises and things that keep those kinds of operations functioning in the future.
The strength of our community is the people itself. And there's no question about that. If everybody would work on that, I think that would be great. But, there's some things that the community sometimes feel like fearful to do something even though they want to. And I want to ask you this: what are those issues that people should be engaging right now to help the cause?
Yeah.
Do you have any?
I would encourage people to challenge their own insecurities. They may think that something is a great idea, but they don't feel that they have anything to contribute. Sometimes all we need in our office is another person over the age of 18 who can witness a document to ensure that a family has a will that makes sure that their property is going to move the correct direction when they pass, and that gives them enormous peace of mind. Sometimes we just need somebody available to help out with things administratively. You don't have to be the person who is physically helping a tenant move into their new home if that's not where you feel your strengths lie. There's always room for volunteers in our organization, in other organizations. Engagement is important, even if it is just being active and vocal about giving your support to an issue. So whether it is liking and sharing something on Facebook and trying to call attention to it among your friends, keeping important issues important is going to improve the circumstances, and every little bit does help.
It doesn't matter what the person, the community decide to do, as long put their hands on the issues, it will help everybody, definitely. And what are some ways that, what are some barriers by the housing and legal services they are current right now? What are the barriers right now between the both?
This is one of my sensitive issues. One of the things that our organization, everybody involved in it, is very passionate about is the access to justice. And that means to us that the impediments that are between an individual and the judge, like getting to the court to make a decision, that those are reduced. So whether it is a language barrier or a cost of filing barrier or the ability to advocate your case, maybe you don't present yourself well and you need some help and advocacy. Maybe you know exactly what needs to be said and how it needs to be said, but you don't speak the language that needs to be interpreted to the court. How do you move for an interpreter if needed? How do you get through those courtroom doors and have your case heard when it needs to be heard? So those access to justice barriers are very real. Under the current circumstances, there are courts that are operating on very different rules than what you may have been used to. So we might not be able to get a jury. We might not be able to get a live hearing. I myself am on a medical situation where I am appearing in court the same way I'm appearing here now virtually. If you are a low-income household, you might not have stable internet that is going to support a Zoom conference with a judge and other attorneys. That is a huge barrier as well. If you don't have the ability to communicate effectively with the court, with your attorney if you have one, if you don't have transportation to get there for that live hearing because you do not have a vehicle, you've sold it to make other bills. If you have instability in your housing and you're not receiving your mail, every single one of those issues can cause a breakdown in your access to justice. And it's a very real hurdle that a lot of our clients deal with because they are low income. And it's not necessarily something that we can address across the board, but we can try and mitigate those circumstances as best as possible, which is why our office does some of the case management and trying to seek those rental assistance funds, because we know that our client might not have access to email to be able to submit the documents where they need to go.
Extremely difficult. And let's talk about Charleston County.
Okay.
How can they support your work?
Well, there's a couple of things you can do. If you are a passionate and eager volunteer type person and you want to get involved with things like estate planning support and being that person that, you know, hosts a Will's clinic in your area, that is important for housing where people are passing property through their generations. So not just landlord tenant, but ownership of familial properties. If you are interested in being involved in the landlord tenant arena, we have a housing court that is a special pilot program that a number of our legal services partners are associated and active with. We have 4 courts now open. North Area 1, 2, and 3 in West Ashley. We do need legal related volunteers there, but you are always welcome to come and observe court so long as you clear it with that particular judge in advance, because we are operating under different rules. You can always write a letter in support of these efforts and writing to your legislators to let them know what is an important issue for you. Donating money is always helpful, but one of the things that I found to be much easier and more palatable as an individual is if you are an internet shopper and use Amazon, we would love to be your Amazon Smile charity, because those dollars are fantastic and they are like found money for us. So that is great too. You know, you can always contact Charleston Pro Bono and ask about how you can do that. And most of us do a lot of shopping online, especially since we are kind of remote right now. If none of that appeals to you and you don't feel like you've got any personal interest in getting involved hands-on, anything you can do to like and or support the efforts of your housing service provider community, whether it's going to any one of our websites, whether it's letting the people at the county, the city, and the state know what we're doing is important work, that is huge for us, because that is how we get funding to keep our doors open and move forward. Is we demonstrate what we're doing is important and valuable, and then we ask for support.
You know, Nicole, when the average citizen is listening to you from the community speaking or go through this situation, it's very difficult for them to understand what you are talking about. We need hope on that sense, because the language is different. What advice you give to the families ahead? We're not saying that it's going to happen, but we're going to say, maybe if I learn this a little bit more, I can help somebody else. What advice you give them so they can start, you know, break that wall between them and you and try to understand this language that at the end is going to really help everyone?
So there are a number of educational programs that we put together in our group, that we put together as lawyers, and that we try and bring out to the community as frequently as possible. You're welcome to go to our Facebook page and watch some of the area-specific legal education programs that we've done. participating with the local library where we also provide educational resources. But informing yourself is empowering yourself to know what your rights are as a tenant, as a mortgagee, mortgagor. You know, depending on how your familial structure is, we've seen families who carry the paper on a note for another family member, and they don't want to upset the family's apple cart by having issues there. But you need to know what your rights are when you enter into a contract, and you need to know how to exercise those rights in an appropriate manner. It's important to be informed. So whether it is housing or a domestic relationship and you don't know whether or not you're going to be the party asked to leave during a divorce, making sure that you know what your rights are is the best way of staying secure, stable, and thinking in a proactive manner. So you'll be able to sleep better at night if you know what your rights are and how to exercise them than the person who was wondering what if.
We are in extraordinary times, right? Especially this year with all this situation. And we're gonna have to keep talking about hope and thank for you and everybody that Pro Bono Legal Service is helping. But what give you hopes these days? Where the hopes is coming from for you?
Well, I have an amazing team, and they just remind me daily all of the great things that we're doing and what we can keep doing and how we can expand and offer more. And so that is a great source of hope and encouragement for me. And it's not just our team within our office, but our entire network of service providers statewide who are working so hard and tirelessly. And then every once in a while, something really good comes. And so we are extremely hopeful about this CDC order. I believe that's probably why more people are here, is because they want to hear about what that CDC order on an eviction moratorium is going to mean for their clients and them personally. Again, while that gives us an immense amount of hope, I do want to sort of temper that and remind people that the order has not gone into effect yet. It's scheduled to go into effect once it is entered in the Federal Register, and the date that is planned for is September 4th. That is an eviction moratorium where no other eviction moratorium that is more comprehensive exists. So that would apply to all of South Carolina, to all landlord-tenant arrangements, not just federally backed mortgages, and that it would, there are certain procedural obligations within it. Now again, it's a 37-page document of legalese, and I am trying to make sure that I understand it pretty thoroughly before I give too much information about it. And it did just come out less than 24 hours ago. But what we believe about this moratorium right now is that you make a certification as a tenant to your landlord that you have had some sort of economic hardship, that you have made due diligent efforts into finding and attempting to secure assistance funding, that you are going to make good faith partial payments if you are at all able to do so, and that you understand that this is not a rent holiday, that the rent will eventually come due at the end of the termination of the moratorium. And then that is supposed to suffice to prevent you from being dispossessed of your housing during the applicability period, which is a lot more legalese, but we are working as a group to put together the necessary paperwork and make it available so that a tenant can self-certify and preserve those records to keep themselves protected and secure in their housing during the application period. So that's a huge source of hope for us.
Definitely. You know, you're talking about, I want to remind everybody, but I want to ask you my last question for the moment is that what do you want to say to the people so they will not forget something that you don't want them to forget about everything that you do? What it is that? What do you want the community do not forget?
Housing first. Remember, housing first. When you have stability in your housing circumstances, whatever they may be, other things flow from that. Having that reliable mail, having that reliable address, knowing where you're going to lay your head at night is a huge comfort. And it is absolutely critical to children who've had a lot of instability related to coronavirus and the schools and everything that's going on, but to know that the kids are secure, that the parents are not having added stressors. Putting that housing first is putting a family first, and it's making stability long-term for them. So just always make sure that you are making that the primary concern, and everything else will flow from that. If you have any needs or help or requests that relate to housing and housing laws, reach out to your legal services provider or the South Carolina Bar, wherever you may be. If you are in Charleston, reach out to us, charlestonprobono.org. You can call our office, 843-536-456.
You know, Nicole, everything that you've been talking about in this short little time is so powerful. It really have a lot of content in it. So I suggest everybody to listen to it twice if you can, so you can get the best of it. Chris, it was an honor to talk to Nicole and everybody here.
Thanks, Lydia and Nicole. I'm going to open it up to questions for folks who are on right now. If you want to just type something in the chat, if you have anything for Nicole that you are curious about. I have a lot of questions, so while people are considering, I'll ask you a few different things. So first of all, I know you talked a little bit about the services that Charleston Pro Bono provides, but who is eligible for your services? What do I need to do to be eligible for the services you provide?
Well, we do have a couple of different grants, so it depends on the type of question you have as to what those eligibilities and services will be. For me personally, for the grant that I operate under, it is the 200% of the federal poverty level as set by HUD. We also have a percentage of the area median income, and I'm hoping Alyssa will tip her hand and type that percentage cap to me to let me know what that one exactly is. But Charleston County is our service area. We do have some relaxed caps for certain special groups, such as veterans that come to us through the Valor program, that may not, they might not be from Charleston County, or if we have a frontline worker who is seeking an estate plan or something similar because they are particularly high risk and they might be over our income guidelines. This is a pro bono service that we're doing as well. Our goal is to try and maximize services and find a way to provide the services rather than exclude people because they're just on the edge of the eligibility. We always do work pretty hard to make sure that if there is a possible way of making someone eligible for service, that we provide them what they can be provided.
So if I'm somebody who's struggling with or potentially struggling with my housing locally, like, do you have a ballpark of like what I need to make to be eligible?
200% of the federal poverty level for me, if you're in Charleston County, based off of your housing size. So if you're an individual, just go to Google and check and see what the HUD or the federal poverty level states for a single family home. I think, okay, Alyssa's tipping me off. For household size of up to one for city and county, it is about $43,000 a year.
Okay.
I have a question, if you don't
Yes,
mind.
ma'am.
You know, Nicole, I know you guys been serving the Hispanic community in a way that I'm very, very happy, impressed, and I want to thank you in the name of, you guys didn't forget about the Hispanic grassroots community. How difficult it is, the communication level, because of the language barrier for you all.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you guys been doing the job well, I'm curious because it's a barrier of communication.
It is a barrier, and I have absolutely no Spanish. I can say thank you and please direct me to the bathroom. That's as far as I go, but we have got 2 native Spanish speakers in our office who are wonderful and enthusiastic, helpful people. That helps if we have an issue that is dealing with an in-office matter. If it is a courtroom matter, we file a motion for an interpreter to be appointed in the case. That is done through the Indigent Defense Funds. It is not something that is charged to the litigant. Our office does not require that you be a citizen to seek legal services, which is sort of an unusual characteristic of our office, whereas other legal service providers do require that. Our office does provide some legal resources for survivors of human trafficking. So if there is a need there, most of the time those people aren't going to have any legal status documents to prove eligibility under citizenship theory, and we want to make sure that those people are getting the services they need. So yes, we have someone in our office who speaks, or two people in our office who speak Spanish, and also one who speaks Portuguese. We also have a wonderful network of former volunteers and Ackerman Fellow who speaks several languages, including German and Romanian, and one who speaks a few indigenous languages from South America.
Question in the chat, and I know that this just came out today, but if a tenant is experiencing financial hardship and cannot pay their rent, what is the process for requesting protection under the moratorium? I think that's probably still being sussed out.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so right now what we have as a collective group of housing attorneys from across the state, we've talked about a couple of strategies there, and what we're looking at is there is a certification portion of the CDC's order. It has a couple of check boxes where the tenant has to certify to the landlord in writing that they've attempted to seek legal assistance, they've attempted to, rental assistance, sorry, not legal assistance, that they are willing to make good faith partial payments, that they are not, in some way otherwise getting federal housing, like subsidy assistance, that they're just not, that they're making all reasonable efforts to pay that rent as it comes due, and that this is not like some way of skirting the rules, and also that they certify that they understand that the rent will eventually come due. We are putting together a form, and right now, this is just a concept that we're working on right now. We don't have the approvals for it, but what it is looking like it's going to be is first a page of instructions, a letter to the tenant explaining to them what the documents they're looking at are, how they work, what they need to do, and then 2 copies of a certification document, one that they can fill out and give to the landlord, one that they can make as a duplicate for themselves, because we figure that most of our clients aren't going to have access to a copy machine. So if they are able to pick up a hard copy somewhere, whether it's like a library or office or another location that might provide these services, that they already have the 2 copies, and that they have one that they can hang on to for themselves to remember what they certified to. And then the last page would be a list of service providers, or how to get in touch with service providers to make sure that if they are certifying as a tenant, that they have sought rental assistance, that they legitimately did seek rental assistance and weren't able to find any. Because ideally, if they are able to seek rental assistance and they're eligible and they're approved, then that remedies the need for the certification anyways.
So, we're talking about this moratorium, and I guess I just want to hear from you, for folks who haven't really been engaged in the conversation around housing up to this point, with regard the COVID-19 pandemic, how, like, from your perspective, has that sort of shaped and influenced the sort of housing landscape in our region? What does that look like for you over the last several months?
Well, so housing was an issue prior to COVID. This was not a new problem. COVID definitely highlighted, italicized, bolded, and underscored everything. It really called attention to what had been sort of an issue that existed and was emerging in the public consciousness and awareness. But what this has shown us is how fragile the system can be. Mm-hmm. We have those 10-day eviction notices. It is so incredibly difficult for a person who is facing eviction under the current COVID crisis that we're dealing with to apply, get a background check, get a credit check, view apartments, schedule those viewings, and actually be approved and moved into a place. And if you're thinking of doing that in a 10-day timeline, you better have a ton of available dollars to make those security deposit and first month rent, plus any fees that are associated with application. It's just not really, it's not real practical under the circumstances. It was hard before. It's near impossible under the current climate. And when you think about what 10 business days looks like in reality, I mean, could you imagine moving on that much notice?
I have one more question, because thinking about the community now, I see a lot of letters that coming from the owner, from the landlord to the tenant. You had 10 days, not the court, from them themselves. So can you talk a little bit more about it?
So there are a couple of kinds of notices that are routinely issued in landlord-tenant communications. The first notice is the short one, which is the 24-hour notice of intent to access by a landlord. A landlord might give you, a tenant, a notice that says, we are doing smoke detector inspections. We're going to need to access the premises. If it is now 4:41 on the 2nd of September, I need at least 24 full hours before I can exercise my authority as a landlord after giving that written notice to a tenant that I can enter. So I might say, you've got a 24-hour notice, but in reality it's 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. 2 days hence, because I want to make sure that I'm following my responsibilities under the Act. That is normal under the Landlord-Tenant Act, which is going to govern the tenancies in South Carolina. 24 hours is appropriate, and if it is a reasonable request for access, tenant is not supposed to refuse it. Now, if tenant responds back with, please don't come to my unit, I have coronavirus, and so does everyone in this household, we will schedule at another date, or we can do a video inspection of the functioning smoke detector. You can work with that. Don't abuse it. The next length of notice is the 5-day notice that's routinely issued when there is a delay in payment of rent. So if a tenant has not made full payment of rent or any outstanding late fees, and if utilities are included as part of the rent, it'll specify in the lease, those will also be grounds for that 5-day notice. Those notices can be written into the lease agreement, or they can be issued separately, but they only need to be issued one time during a tenancy. So if you don't have in your lease the language that says, if you do not pay your rent on time, this is your only notice, you will get no other notice so long as you reside here. It's in section 2740, 710 of the Landlord-Tenant Act. Then the landlord would have to issue a separate written notice that says, I, landlord, am telling you, tenant, that you have not paid your rent when it is due. And a landlord may, after 5 full days of that notice being delivered or included in the lease, that grace period being over, they may file an action for possession if even 1 penny is owed of rent, or things that fall under the definition of rent within the Landlord-Tenant Act. So that's the other common notice. The next notice would be the 10-day notice that we've talked about from the court. Now that is a court document. It will come on a form that says State of South Carolina, county of whichever county it's filed in the magistrate court, and it'll say either application for ejectment or it'll say rule to vacate. And it specifies on there in bold language, you've got 10 days, and if you want to show up and show cause, you need to call this number or show up at this address and demand a hearing. There are counties in the state that will pre-schedule those hearings for you. You don't need to make the demand, but you do have to show. Charleston County requires you to make the demand. So if you are a tenant and you get served with a rule to vacate, you need to exercise your rights to protect your rights by calling that number or showing up at that address. The next length of time is going to be the 14-day notice, and this is my last one for breaches of lease. If somebody has breached the lease, such as having an unauthorized pet, unauthorized occupant, parking their vehicle in the grass and they shouldn't be, landlord's going to give tenant that 14-day notice that says you've got to correct this. If you correct it within the 14 days, the issue is resolved and cured. We're done. Similar for tenants to landlord. If tenant is letting the landlord know the HVAC is not working and it is boiling in their unit, they got to give them that 14-day letter and specify that you've got to come in, you got to make these repairs. That letter serves as consent for the landlord to access and make the repairs, and then you got to let them in and make those repairs. But if they make the repairs within 14 days or a reasonable amount of time related to the circumstances, such as a shutdown in the supply line from a hurricane, then the issue is resolved and tenant doesn't have any further action against the landlord. And then the very last notice is the 30-day notice to end a tenancy. If it's not otherwise specified as a longer time period in the lease, a tenancy term can be ended on 30 days written notice, whether it is a month-to-month tenancy being notified to the tenant, you got 30 days to go, whether it is a year lease and the landlord gives the tenant a notice of non-renewal in that 11th month. That is just a no-fault termination of lease. There's not a lot of defenses that can be raised against it unless there's some sort of discriminatory effect or action. But that is the last type of notice that is common. Everything else is going to be related to appeals, motions, court process, and they're not pretty normal.
So given all that information, like what would you say are some of the most common like misconceptions that people have around the eviction process here in your sort of experience working with your community?
You know, I've had a lot of tenants that have told me that they went to court and no one let them speak. I have never observed that. I've always observed judges who make it very clear, I will hear you when it's your turn. We're going to give them their turn. You need to know what your rights are when it comes to addressing the court, and you need to know what your rights are in getting to that court. So one of the biggest misconceptions is that they will get to court and not have the opportunity to be heard. The primary tenet of all courts in this country is notice and opportunity to be heard. That is our procedural due process. So you need to know that you have the right to show up, you have the right to demand that hearing, you have the right to plead your case.
So I know you touched on this a little bit, but say I don't know anything at all about that whole process. What's the most way for me to find that information in layman's terms about, you know, what are my rights? How do I figure that out?
Call me. That's what you need to do. If you are trying to get information about what general landlord tenant is, check out one of our prior programs. We have Landlord Tenant 101. We hold it several times a year. We also have a recorded Landlord Tenant 101. It goes through the act. It goes through material terms of leases. It covers the basics. These are important things a tenant needs to know about, where they can look for what those minimum housing standards are, what those essential services are, and what they're entitled to as contract damages if they prevail on a case in front of a judge. They also need to know what their duties and obligations are as a tenant, what's going to be expected of them, and what they can be expected to pay for things. So these are very important Landlord Tenant 101 basics. Look to those programs, look to the act. It is not the most user-friendly law that I've seen, but it is section 27-40, 10 through I think 900 of the South Carolina Code of Laws. You can type that in, or you can type in the South Carolina Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, and it will take you to the SC legislature. We have a ton of landlord tenant self-help resources on the SC bar, self-help, and for the public tabs. And then our social media has a bunch of frequently asked questions. And we also have some advanced landlord tenant issues related to subsidized housing and stuff related to emergency services planning, such as when there is a hurricane and getting those extraordinary repairs.
You know, it takes time to get an appointment sometimes because of the amount of work, but what is the best way for a tenant to communicate with you and try to understand, look, you know, we're going to get to you, just when do we give you that call?
Yep. What our office needs is we've got to check our boxes as well and make sure that we're complying with our grants. So what we need from an applicant is, one, put in an application, whether you go to our website, charlestonprobono.org, and click the button that says request legal help that takes you to our online application, or whether you call our office at 843-853-6456 and ask to either do a phone application then, or schedule to have someone call you back to do a phone. Alex or Laura may be on the phone with somebody and we need a Spanish speaker at the time. We'll have to call them back, schedule that, and get it done. We usually get those done pretty quickly after somebody's requested. It takes generally about 2 business days. That's our goal for getting a person verified in their application, because we want to make sure that they are within our geographic service region. We want to make sure that we don't have any conflicts of interest in their representation that would offend our professional requirements. And we also want to make sure that they're within our eligibility for household size and incomes computation there. And then if they don't have a legally justiciable issue, we don't make that determination on the front end. We wait until we talk to them, because we've had so many people, I particularly can think of at least 3 cases where the person puts this statement in their application of what they believe their legal issue to be, and that's not really a case, but they do have a valid claim as to something completely different that they just did not know that that was a problem. So we do have those 2 main avenues. If you are going to try and get into our office and you are having trouble with filing an application or getting in through the phone because maybe you don't have internet or phone service, we're really great with the navigation center. If you go to the navigation center and ask the people there to try and get access to the Google Suite upstairs, or people at the library to help you put in an application, there are helpers available. You just have to, find them and ask.
We'll make sure to put those links in the description. For the last bit of our time, we focus a lot on sort of the education piece, but again, a huge part of the series is activation and getting people more engaged in this work. And I know that a lot of times it can seem pretty daunting to sort of get involved, especially when it comes to like legislation, which can seem like a whole other language. And I know you alluded to your legislative wish list, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about, what the pandemic has highlighted, like what are some of the most glaring discrepancies in the way that our legislative process is set up, and how do I, as a random citizen, sort of get my voice heard on that level? What are the avenues that I would use to sort of speak about some of the most pressing issues that are impacting our state and our community?
Be tenacious, be a squeaky wheel. The squeaky wheel gets the attention. We keep hearing in the news about the vocal minority. Why don't you be that vocal majority and let the people in power know that this is an important issue? There are a lot of inherent inconsistencies in the power relationship in landlord-tenant. The act seems to assume that tenants have real negotiating or bargaining authority when it comes to what's in their lease agreement, and that is just not true in practical effect. A lot of times we'll see boilerplate leases, and some of those boilerplate leases will say things like, in the event of an epidemic, that the landlord doesn't have an obligation to meet its minimum requirements for housing, habitability, and repair. But the tenant is still obligated to maintain their obligations under the rent. Now, we haven't actually had that case or had that provision challenged. I imagine that a court would look at that as an inappropriate waiver of their obligations under the Landlord-Tenant Act, which is supposed to be prohibited. But it still exists, and tenants regularly believe that the landlord does not have a duty to make those repairs. Coronavirus has absolutely underscored that power shift and balance as being a huge problem. We also see issues where it costs more for the tenant to get their types of relief, at least in Charleston County. Actions filed by the landlord tend to be possessory in nature. An eviction action based on a breach of lease or non-payment of rent costs them $40 to file and serve. If a tenant has an issue with the landlord related to something that is monetary damages to the tenant, they have to go to small claims where it's over twice that to file and serve it. And also the tenant gets a 10-day response on that possessory action, whereas the landlord would get 30 days to respond to that action in small claims court that costs twice as much. That is just the inherent difference in the court between that possessory action and the action that is for money damages. But the actions for money damages are what the tenants file. That's what their causes and claims are related to, whereas the landlord is going to always be going through that possessory action, or almost always going through that possessory action, and they can get judgments for money damages in their possessory actions. So they don't always need to go to small claims.
I cannot help but say one more thing, honestly, because you guys have a website, is Facebook, talking about all these issues. The best thing that the community can do to be active and help is forward the information, pass the information, pass this video. I think that's a good communication system that the grassroots community can do, and anybody, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, speaking to, again, what you're talking about, Nicole, or just like those legislative processes, do you know of like good resources? Like maybe don't know the language or the people that I should be reaching out to. Like, how do I figure out who I should be sort of raising my voice to, and how do I figure out what I should be telling them in a way that, you know, makes sense?
Well, it's always good to know who your particular representatives are and how to contact them. You know, the South Carolina legislature publishes what the delegations are and who's in those delegations. The Charleston County legislative delegation has their own webpage, so you can find out who your people are and express your own opinions to them.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that the people that are the elected officials representing you at the state, representing you at the federal government level, are representing what you actually hold to be of value and important. So just do feel free to contact those representatives and senators that you've elected, and whether or not you voted for them, but let them know what your important issues are. Feel free to send them email, send them whatever it is that you think is important, and call attention to it, because those squeaky wheels are the ones that get the grease, and you want to make sure that your voice is being heard.
And maybe I don't know like the proper language to use. Like, is it still a benefit for me just to like say, hey, I'm frustrated with the way that this is working? You know, is that sufficient?
I will say that I have a tendency to couch everything in legal terms of art. And I do that largely because a lot of the people in our government are attorneys themselves, and they respond to that sort of language. But there is a good bit of response from people who are just giving their normal impassioned position.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't encourage you to contact your legislator and say, I really need to know what's happening over in Area 51.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a good idea. Yeah, it is a good idea to reach out to your representation and let them know that you think housing is important, if you think housing is important, and to tell them that you know, you think it's important because housing stability drives a community and it makes a sustainable economy, and it supports all of the necessary functions of community that make places worth living in.
Great. One last quick thing, because again, advocacy is a big piece, but you talked about volunteering too, and I know we're running low on time, but where can I go to learn more about housing courts and participating in that and getting involved or contributing to those systems?
Well, there is a housing court that takes place Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesdays. So you can just contact either our office to get that schedule. 180 Place Legal Division, they have a schedule as well as to where that is and whether or not you want to be involved with something like that. You can also reach out to Charleston Legal Access, South Carolina Legal Services. This is a passion project of housing attorneys and legal aid organizations in our area, as well as filtering across the state now. So there is a number of channels you can get dialed into to learn more about housing court and how to support it, and what the Access to Justice mission is related to the housing court pilot program.
And just like as a quick summary for those who don't know, like in a sentence or two, what is the housing court program?
Okay, so the housing court program is a court where cases of eviction are being heard as a group, and it gives the defendant different protections or different avenues to pursue legal representation. So when an eviction is filed in a housing court jurisdiction, the tenant also receives with their summons and their rule to vacate a informational sheet that tells them how to get in touch with organizations like Charleston Pro Bono Legal Services or another legal service provider, what those eligibility requirements may be and what they need to do to get into our office on the front end, meet with an attorney, try and organize their case, seek rental assistance if needed. It tells them how to demand their hearing in very explicit terms and to ask to be put on that housing court docket. If they did not get into our office in advance of their hearing, then they have another shot at having legal representation from a licensed attorney in South Carolina. They will be met by a law student who's volunteering, and get an application at the site for pro bono assistance. And then there will be a legal aid attorney who's serving as a roster or duty attorney for every term of housing court to aid the volunteer attorney who is a private bar member who has taken on a day where they're gonna do their level best to represent your best interest as a tenant in landlord-tenant actions, formulate your defense, and help you negotiate a modification or reinstatement plan if that's appropriate, as well as having funds available for rental assistance.
Yeah, so a great resource.
It is.
Yeah, so with that, again, I want to thank you, Nicole, for taking the time today, and Lydia. Again, some good takeaways there are, again, if you're faced with an eviction, call Nicole, call Charleston Pro Bono, again, and do so quickly. Don't wait on it. Again, as soon as you get that notice, again, reach out, seek support, because the support is out there. And again, there are ways to be involved. Again, write your legislators, express, your concerns. And Housing Court is doing some great work, so look into that more. Some things that I'm taking away from today. But thanks, everyone, and appreciate your time.
Bye. Thanks for coming.